The political philosophy of Carl Schmitt has experienced a surge in interest in right-wing circles over the last few years, especially his concept of the friend-enemy distinction, which is used to frame international and more commonly domestic politics as a struggle between us and them. This timely development epitomizes the cynicism with which many regard the political state of Western nations, especially with regards to the USA. This is not only due to the cultural dominance of American media globally, but also because their situation seems to acutely expose and amplify the tensions inherent in all Western democracies. By this, I am of course referring to the culture wars, apathy felt towards democratic solutions after the disappointment of Trump, accelerating left-wing radicalism, and predictions of civil war. This phenomenon has led to a number of the usual inane public intellectuals decrying what they see as an abandonment of reasonable political discourse and a concerning shift towards tribalism. They advocate fortifying the marketplace of ideas through rigorous public debate and cross-political dialogue to protect our liberal democracy from the parasitic ideological forces like wokeness on the left and populism on the right. More serious critics of our current liberal democracy have instead looked to more interesting thinkers like Carl Schmitt to provide a formulation of politics that more aptly explains the state of our current system. While this is certainly hopeful, it will become clear by the end of this video why it is necessary to scrutinise our use of some of these ideas. This fairly short essay will investigate the concept of the friend-enemy distinction, providing a rejoinder to the popular usage which seeks to reduce a rather abstract and formal philosophical idea into a mere reframing of us and them politics. The friend-enemy distinction was initially formulated in the concept of the political, published in Weimar Germany in 1923. In this text, Carl Schmitt attempts to define the limits of what is described by the word politics. Politics is derived from the Greek word politika, or affairs of the cities, and thus refers to action in the context of a collective body of people. In 19th century Europe and beyond, this has been the nation-state, which is the historical context for Schmitt's critique. So what does Schmitt highlight as the realm of human action which is uniquely political? In his own words, the specific political distinction to which political actions and motives can be reduced is that between friend and enemy. Schmitt argues that the identities that constitute different religious, moral, aesthetic, or economic groups are not inherently political. That is to say, Catholics and Protestants, utilitarians and deontologists, expressionists and impressionists, and competing businesses or economic classes do not necessarily constitute political enemies. Likewise, those of the same respective collective identity are not necessarily political friends. The friend-enemy binary is the supreme existential distinction. In other words, the differences that define these group antagonisms like good and evil, profitability and unprofitability, and beauty and ugliness do not reflect political antagonisms unless they compel members of the group to kill in the name of the group. The enemy is something existentially different and alien who is positioned in a way to negate his opponent's way of life. The primacy of the state in Schmitt's theory is crucial to understanding the friend-enemy distinction. It is not ethnic, cultural, or otherwise social collectives that define who is the enemy, it is the state. As he writes, in its entirety, the state as an organised political entity decides for itself the friend-enemy distinction. The enemy is not merely any competitor or just any partner of a conflict in general. He is also not the private adversary whom one hates. An enemy exists only when, at least potentially, one fighting collectivity of people confronts a similar collectivity. The enemy is the sole public enemy, because everything that has a relationship to a collectivity of men, particularly to a whole nation, becomes public by virtue of such a relationship. It is among political friends, that is to say within the state, that secondary concepts of the political, like party politics and political intrigue, emerge. So how can we relate the fundamental concept of politics according to Schmitt to party politics, the area where people, at least on Twitter, most often apply the term? He writes, the equation politics equals party politics is possible whenever antagonisms among domestic political parties succeed in weakening the all-embracing political unit, the state. The intensification of internal antagonisms has the effect of weakening the common identity vis-à-vis another state. If domestic conflicts among political parties have become the sole political difference, the most extreme degree of internal political tension is thereby reached, i.e., the domestic, not the foreign friend and enemy groupings are decisive for armed conflict. The ever-present possibility of conflict must always be kept in mind. If one wants to speak of politics in the context of the primacy of internal politics, then this conflict no longer refers to war between organised nations, but to civil war. Even, for example, a campaign of proletarian class interests against the bourgeoisie is not inherently political. Only, quote, when it reaches a certain quantity, economic property, for example, becomes obviously social, or more correctly political power. Propriety turns into pouvoir, and what is at first only an economically motivated class antagonism turns into a class struggle of hostile groups. It is all right there in the text. The friend-enemy distinction cannot refer to different political tribes, the Democrats and the Republicans, progressives and reactionaries, or even your favourite Twitter e-celeb and his detractors. These are not political in the Schmittian use of the term, at least until there is an actual, or at least Twitter, civil war. I think this misconception arises for a number of reasons. Firstly, that the sphere of politics has infected every area of modern life. There is no distinction in the minds of agitators between the personal and the political, and the separation of politics and civic society seems to hardly exist in public discourse. As such, most contemporary readers of Schmitt fail to interpret his more nuanced view of politics. But also the fact that when it comes to the theory itself, Schmitt makes similar claims in other works, just not under the conceptual umbrella of the friend-enemy distinction. Here is an excerpt from his critique of Parliament and liberalism in The Crisis of Parliamentary Democracy. Many norms of contemporary parliamentary law, above all provisions concerning the independence of representatives and the openness of sessions, function as a result like a superfluous decoration, useless and even embarrassing, as though someone had painted the radiator of a modern central heating system with red flames in order to give the appearance of a blazing fire. The parties, which, according to the text of the written constitution officially do not exist, do not face each other today discussing opinions, but as social or economic power groups calculating their mutual interests and opportunities for power, and they actually agree compromises and coalitions on this basis. The masses are won over through a propaganda apparatus whose maximum effect relies on an appeal to immediate interests and passions. The rest of the work provides further critique of the Weimar Republic's parliamentary system, and is worth studying in detail for anyone interested, but I think I've made my case at this point, and that will have to wait for another video.